Welcome to the Future of Tourism podcast. I'm David Peacock.
Stop owning your own content.
Young leaders are stepping up.
Bring everyone to the table
and imagine their world anew.
Around the world, there's a new course to be plotted as destination organizations look inward at stakeholders and residents and begin to address the organizational changes needed to facilitate that shift. Marketing must have a local voice, budgets need to shift, and alignment and a shared vision with multiple community partners is a rapidly growing priority. Jack Johnson is the Chief Advocacy Officer at Destinations International. If you know Jack at all, then you know he's a passionate advocate for destination organizations globally, a strategist, a problem solver, consensus builder. And for his work, well, that speaks for itself. Adam Burke is President and CEO of the Los Angeles Tourism and Convention Bureau. He is, in my humble opinion, one of the most progressive thinkers and doers in the industry. To the challenge of unlocking all the potential of tourism to create long-term sustainable benefits, not just for Los Angeles, but for everyone, he brings 25 years of experience across hotels, destinations, U.S. travel, Destinations International, to name just a few. Jack and Adam are two respected friends and peers of the industry who've been pushing the boundaries of what tourism means to cities, to people, to the world for the last 2 decades and more. Both of them driven by a belief that tourism done well enriches, ennobles, and regenerates. Good afternoon, guys. How are you, Jack? How are you, Adam? Jack, you go
David.
first.
Hey, David. I'm doing really good.
Where are you?
I am back home in San Antonio, Texas.
Well, it's great to see you. I think the last time we met was Minneapolis.
Yeah,
Yes.
I usually see you on the road. Yeah.
Yeah. Adam Burke, I have seen you more recently. I saw you in Victoria at the Impact Conference. I want to talk about that today, but how are you? Where are you? What are you up to?
Doing great. You're catching me in travel attire today. I'm in LA, but getting ready to head out for a 2-week trip to India and China. So incredibly excited because this will actually be the first time I've had the opportunity to see our team members in market in India and China since before the pandemic. So really excited to see the business coming back, but more importantly, to reconnect with the team.
Well, I hear the luster of that, and I also see the endless hours on airplanes. God bless you.
I think we've all gotten to the point where, email overload is a real thing. So having a 10-hour flight to get to the bottom of your inbox is an awfully attractive prospect.
It is. It is.
All right. So, guys, we're about 45 days into 2023, and I'm gonna tell you, I'm not a pessimist. I'm not an optimist. I tend to be up the middle, but I'm encouraged. Little things that started happening last year that are happening bigger and bigger. I mean, Aspen is experimenting with a new model of capacity, compression, and comfort. Jack, that was launched at the Advocacy Summit. It's great to see people doing this stuff. North Myrtle Beach is developing an engagement piece directly with frontline stakeholders to expand their digital presence at the stakeholder level. And Queenstown has declared carbon zero by 2030. And they're all hard at work. Adam, in Victoria, you could feel a shift. A year ago at that conference, there was a lot of talk about what to do and who's going to do what. There was plenty of money that's flooded into tourism, not enough, but enough that there's a lot of initiatives that wouldn't have started otherwise. And last year I was worried that those initiatives were going to get watered down into checkbox sort of things. Hey, did we do our sustainability list? It didn't. I'm excited by what I'm seeing. I'm seeing communities engaged. I feel a shift. I'm gonna ask you first, Adam. Do you see it?
100%. And by the way, I don't know if Jack, you feel the same way, but I now feel this huge weight to live up to those introductions. I'll certainly say no pressure. Yeah, I think there has been a significant shift. And I think part of it is one of the biggest fallacies that I think we've all heard over the last 3 years about the pandemic was that no one could have seen this coming. Well, unfortunately, that's just not true, because the scientific community has been warning anyone who would listen, which unfortunately was not enough people, for the better part of over a decade that we were long overdue for a quote global pandemic, right? That was their exact quote. And everyone, myself included, right? We didn't heed the warnings. So,
indeed.
I think what we saw is our industry was ill prepared for something that, had we been listening to the right warning signs, we would have been better prepared to mitigate and manage. And I think that's what's created the sense of urgency. We saw that there's a fragility to tourism's ecosystem, that if we don't address those foundational issues, there are going to be other major disruptions. And I think, my goal for us all collectively is, let's learn from the last 3 years so that we can really take a much broader definition of what sustainability means to our industry. And I think that's created a huge sense of urgency. But I think the other thing that's great is there's strength in numbers. We're all trying to learn from each other. And the sense I get is, unlike the middle of the pandemic, where you saw some organizations competing around issues of health and safety, sustainability, I think people are now realizing that this is much more foundational and we need to be collaborating on these issues. So I absolutely agree with you. I think Impact and other events like it show that there's a real will to move the ball downfield on this stuff.
Jack, you've been working on this for literally as long as I've known you. You put the lexicon in our thinking. You have been the strongest advocate of advocacy in this industry that I can think of, and not just here around the world. I see you in Europe and elsewhere. That shift from intellectualization to action, are you seeing it? Do you feel it? Are you encouraged? Tell me about your January.
I'm going to disagree and agree at the same time with Adam, which is explains that why I have a political background.
That's so
successful. I think the shift was actually there. Going back to the speech at the convention in 2019, you could feel it, something get knowledge there. And really what we were talking about was a really small shift. I think what you're seeing now, well, let me go back. At the time of the speech, I think we walked off the stage and someone asked me, how long is it going to take for everyone to shift to this community focus? And I said 10, 15 years. I think the pandemic and what happened, that sped everything up. Every trend that was in place before the pandemic just got sped up. So what you're seeing today, it's definitely there. But I think what you're seeing today is based on a small, subtle shifts that people were making even before I spoke in 17, 18, and 19, and definitely into 20. It looks like a big shift now as you go back, because the paths have gone into different directions, but I think the seeds are all there. I'm pleased that it's happening, but yeah.
And I think I'll say, in the spirit of improv, yes, and so yes, and I think where there's been a more fundamental shift, because I agree with you. I mean, you're right, David. Jack has been advocating to the industry for a number of years that we needed to make this shift. The reason I think there's been more of a seismic shift is I think we have to acknowledge the U.S. is actually in a lot of ways significantly behind the rest of the world, particularly Europe, around this notion of not only tourism as a social benefit, but also the necessity of us being stewards of our communities. So, I mean, Jack, you've been talking about that for a long time.
That's the one thing I would point to is, I made this point when the board got together last December. I think those areas in the world, most notably perhaps the United States, that have been very energy rich, energy self-sufficient in the traditional sources of energy, it's taken them longer to acknowledge the actions that they need to take. It's really, the amount of how long fire seasons are, going from 3 months to 12 months. You all talk about California, but Washington, Oregon, Texas, anywhere through the Southwest are on fires. The sheer number of tornadoes and hurricanes and the intensity of them, that you're actually now have something tangible in front of you that most people, like in America and other places of the world, can now say, oh, wow, something has definitely really shifted here. It has shaped here. I think I'm going to join the movement. But yeah, I mean, you still got to have, I look at Saudi Arabia, who is entering into the tourism arena and realize they need to be do it in a very sustainable, very environmentally friendly approach, which has the benefit of perhaps freeing up more oil and gas that they can then sell and elsewhere and fund these initiatives. But it is, I think, anyone who's making a major entree into the tourism arena, especially in the developing world, understands they have to come in with a sustainability plan and a proven track record under their
Jack,
belt.
I love the fact, by the way, that you use the word movement. I think that's exactly the right word to use for this. This is not a program. It's not an initiative. This absolutely is a movement. That's the way we have to think about it, because this has to be a permanent, long-term effort.
Yeah, it's not checking the box thing. It is, you're literally, this is something that connects you with the people in your community and stuff like that, because they're pushing you as much as other
Yeah.
factors are pushing you.
So let's go down the path of the movement piece. A year ago, even, there's lots of hand wringing to the question, how do we get started? Jack, you talked about engaged communities taking an active role, but you know this as well as I do, and Adam, you know it from the CEO's seat. When it comes to engaging the community, the rest of the world think DMOs are a lot more engaged than they really are. And my litmus test for that is when the sustainability people came in and started coming into our industry, as they well should, and they've been servicing the meetings and convention side, which is highly organized for a while, but start dealing with transient tourism destinations. And the first words out of their mouth were things like, well, you just set up a meeting with the mayor, and when he gets the council in the room and they tell you, and you're kind of like, yeah, that you really overestimate our alignment. So when it comes to that piece, Jack, you've called it social license before. Everyone's at the starting line now. Everyone's clumsily getting started. We did some stakeholder interview stuff in St. Jacobs as a test a few months ago, and it was shocking. Like my eyes coming out of my head. The level of animosity we were able to uncork in a small group. So there's so much learning to be done here. But as everyone's at the starting line, they're no longer intellectualizing. Should we do this? What are the first steps? How do you establish a social license? Because we really haven't done that before. How do we establish a social license?
And it's not totally easy. What I love about that phrase is that it starts with social, and people have to understand that social license is something that is given by the community to an entity. We have spent a lot of time talking about the community shared value, very similar concept. And we have spent a great deal of time diagramming what a destination organization who has a community shared value may look like, the values that it holds, and this year we're going to be releasing a field guide which really hopes to answer much more definitively, how do I do it? But the thing key to remind is, even if you do all those things, it's still the community that makes you the community shared value. You have to be a shared value in community, which means everyone has to be there, which is a lot of hard work, a lot of engagement, a lot of listening, a lot of letting them know everything you do and being proactively transparent. Give them ownership over you. It's a tough thing to do sometimes, but you really have to give ownership up a bit and let them be participants in the process, and let them shape that direction you go. And they'll follow you down these roads and stuff like that, but they just need to know which road we're going and what's at the end of it. So they have to do that.
That is all net new, though, isn't it? Come on.
Yeah, it is. But I've been saying this for years, which is strictly from an advocacy, a political strategy, it's actually the strategy to go with. Because if you're going with a strategy that's built around your mayor, your councilman, your city, your county board person, your parliament representative, as soon as they're gone, the whole strategy crumbles and you start over again. If you have that support in the community, then you start with a step ahead. Elected officials follow as much as they lead. And if the community is with you, they'll want to know that. They'll want to participate. They'll want to embrace you.
So on the lived experience side of that, front and center, one of the busiest cities in the world, what does that look like? How do you achieve social license? Adam, talk about it, please.
Well, so I guess the first thing I'll say is on behalf of Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, when he or she has a conversation with you as the mayor, I actually want to build off of what Jack said, because I think I would argue And by the way, I mean, we have the luxury of having this time with you today, but there's a lot of amazing work being done by destinations across the country. I mean, I'm continue to be inspired by the creativity, the innovation, the collaboration. So, I'm just one voice among many who are really leaning in on this. What I would say, building off of what Jack said, is I think whether we knew it or not, the community already had ownership over what we did. We just weren't acknowledging that role in it, because I think Jack hit the nail on the head. I mean, elected officials come and go, administrative priorities come and go. The one thing that's the constant is our community. And I think the real sea change, and I look to the work that, Destinations International has done with the DNext studies. You look at the last couple Destination Next studies, and there's no question the days when a DMO could sit on the sidelines and say, our job is just to promote the destination, that ship sailed. And from a community perspective, I think we're viewed as either a net contributor in a positive way to the issues that impact our communities, or we're viewed as part of the problem. So I think that the reality isn't from in terms of social license, long term, our community already had ownership over what we do, because, if you're facing ballot measures and you need community support, the elected officials are going to respond to what the community says. And if you're ever on a ballot, you better make sure that that's not the first time you've engaged with your community. So,
Wow.
in LA, the shift for us has been kind of an acknowledgement of that. And I guess I come at it from the perspective that, pre-pandemic, there had been a lot of discussion and movement around, quote, or over tourism. Well, to me, over tourism is the ultimate manifestation of a destination not partnering with its community. So over the last several years, they always say never let a good crisis go to waste. We fundamentally changed our mission. And I'm a huge believer in mission statements, because I think they say a lot about the care and intentionality with which you articulate your purpose. So I won't even give you our old mission statement. It was very much, if you quote Simon Sinek, it was a what, it wasn't a why. Our mission statement now boils down to one sentence. It's to improve the quality of life for all Angelenos through the economic and community benefits of tourism. So at the end of the day, we're there to be stewards of our community and to improve the life for every Angeleno, including those, for example, experiencing homelessness, issues with food security. The way we do it is through travel and tourism. But ultimately, our goal is to improve the quality of life for Angelenos. That's totally changed the dialogue with elected officials, community leaders, and it's created that social license.
So there's a dynamism in Los Angeles tourism. Jack, you work all over the US and around the world. Who else is doing some really interesting stuff that we can look at and learn from in terms of moving this down the road? Adam, I appreciate you say that everybody's at it. They are, but we're all in varying stages, and the bulk of organizations are really just getting started on this, I believe.
I always hate being asked that question, because I don't want to favor one member over another. No, you're absolutely right, though. No one's doing it all right. And a lot of people are doing some things right. And then there are some really good examples, like Adam here, that is really moving into that broader area. And obviously, Paul and his team in Victoria are doing some great work. There's several, frankly, you can tick off a whole bunch of them. The one I do like to highlight sometimes is in Houston, where one of the things that I think you need to kind of move down this path quickly is to have the support of the mayor, and have the mayor understand your importance, because the brand of Houston is run by Visit Houston or whatever, but is embraced by everyone in Houston. And part of that means the more social aspects of sustainability being embraced as much as the environmental side of the equation also. And the idea that Houston embraces itself as an energy capital, but energy doesn't have to mean oil and gas. It can be something else, so that they moving in that direction, which I find very impressive. But they've put the destination organization in the cornerstone of being the messenger of everything. So I love that.
And I think they're Medical Center of Texas
Mhm,
sort of approach
mhm.
is really humane too, and comes from that same place for sure, for sure.
And David, someone who I would point to is, we had the opportunity to hear her speak at DI's annual last year,
Mhm.
is Sini Jungestad,
Oh, yeah.
who was one of the co-authors of I think a must read for all of us, which was The End of Tourism as We Know It. And of course, now I'm thinking of REM lyrics, but it's something that really struck me, and I think she did a brilliant job of articulating the difference in terms of where we're at in the genesis of this. And it's hard to visualize this if you haven't seen it, but imagine a visual that on the left 90% of the screen shows issues of climate change, workforce development, food security, homelessness, etc. And on the right 10% of the screen was a box that said DMO, Destination Marketing Organization or Destination Management Organization. And she said point blank, she said, in the US, most of us are still arguing over what we should be called
Yes.
when we need to be in the game on the left 90% of that screen. So I think, her point was the most important thing, regardless of what you call it, is you've got to roll up your sleeves and start to dig into the work. And I think one of the points that came out of DI's annual convention last year was this idea that, what's good for residents is always good for visitors, but the reverse does not always hold true. So, one of the things we talked about at Impact was, kind of the Hippocratic oath, first do no harm.
Mhm.
I think that's the lens that we're talking about here. So I think one of the ways that to Jack's point, you really do get that engagement with elected officials is you look at every decision through the lens of, it's great to bring more visitors here, but what impact is that going to have on the community? And if there are going to be negative impacts, then we need to be the ones who are the standard bearers for it has to be a net positive for the community.
That's such a powerful point. I mean, the key element of community shared value is not this checklist that you're going to check off. It's literally a way of looking at every aspect of things that you do, and that's so
So
important.
you guys are great. You always just lead right to the next point. So the next point's KPIs. If we the most important KPIs that we can employ as tourism organizations, especially when we listen to the two of you, are ones that confer this whole idea of a social license widely. Those KPIs do and don't exist. We're very used to performance metrics in a sense, but as we look, we need the next set of KPIs that measure the ongoing strength and diversity of a destination, of its network. The one that I'm just barely seeing emerge already is the alignment with the strategic vision of tourism and the execution of it, its own performance metric. Did we get a widely conferred social license for this, and how did we do against what we said we were going to do? They're happening, but they're not necessarily happening all around the world. And then I see something totally bold. I mean, you talk about Signe Jungerstedt. I know why, because she's your muse on the fact that when you showed up in Victoria, you took the 17 UN WTO Sustainable Development Guidelines and you mapped them over into LA. Talk to us a little bit about that, because that was a fascinating moment for me when you've already explained. I'll throw the graphic in the blog version of this for anyone who wants to read it. It's really good. It's from your slide deck. But talk to us a little bit about your presentation at Impact, because it broadened the scope of the DMO's purview, mandate, and intention by more than I've ever seen.
Well, and I will say, I mean, I will liberally steal good ideas from anyone and everyone. So it's something that we've been doing really behind the scenes, but it was actually the event organizers who, when we were talking about the presentations, I had alluded to the fact that we were starting to map to the SDGs. And, she said, well, I actually think it'd be powerful if you put that in the presentation. So what it really did is accelerated the pace at which we did that work. The reason I think the SDGs are so powerful is because I think we sometimes have a tendency to reinvent the wheel. There's been so much discussion about what the right framework for tourism is around this work. At the end of the day, the SDGs really give us that framework, because if you take a close look, it's not just about climate action. You do have everything in there, from gender equality to clean water to looking at things like food security.
life
so many of
on
the issues we're
land,
life
responsible consumption and
exactly
production, reduced
partnerships.
inequalities.
Yeah, I mean, even the idea, to the social license, the idea of the right partnerships for this social contract are built into the SDGs. So I think that the way that you really get a movement is to give a common lexicon to everybody. And Jack, you're talking to the king of lexicon. I think the SDGs are the right lexicon for us to be embracing as an industry because it's a globally understood set of standards. It gives us a common language that we can use where tourism is not sitting on the outside trying to create a different model. But I think what would be really powerful for us as an industry is for us to identify what are the 5 or 6 areas of the SDGs where we either have the greatest opportunity for positive impact, or arguably where right now we're perhaps perceived as having the biggest negative impact. I mean, you look at the carbon footprint, for example, of our industry. I think the SDGs just give us a direct way of mapping to it. And so right now, what LA is doing, we're on the front end of going through the assessment on sustainable tourism development goals. So one of the things we're doing in LA is we're actually partnering with GSTC to look at their dimensions of what does sustainable tourism look like. Because I think that the goal for us is, we're not trying to get an A on the report card. Part of the reason we're teaming with them is because I want a gap analysis. I want to know for our community, not just for LA tourism, but for our broader tourism community and for our community at large, where are the gaps right now? And I think the advantage of partnering with a reputable third party like that is they're going to come in and they're going to tell you honestly, here are the areas where you're doing well, here are the areas where there's room for improvement, and here are the areas that you're not even thinking about. So I think GSTC is going to be a great partner for that, because I think the first step is to be clear-eyed about where you have strengths, where you have weaknesses, and where you're not even in the conversation. So I'm really excited about the work, even though I think it will yield areas in which we're not doing enough right now.
Yeah. I really appreciate the fact that these are international standards and fairly broadly accepted. So I think that's a great starting point. They're definitely a roadmap. The other thing that Adam said that I just want to underscore is this is not something where you're competing against someone else either. It's not something where you're getting an A and they got a B and you're like, I'm the better one. It's like there's this goal everyone has to get to, because if we don't all work on getting to that goal, it doesn't matter how good LA does. And it's all striving, how much closer am I to this goal? And I think that's the way measurements have to be going forward. And whether it's this or whether it's EDI or anything else like that, that's the way you got a goal set for yourself and you measure down. I think. I'm sorry.
Speak to me about the practicality of that, though, because when we start to measure those things, we've got to recognize there's literally nothing on the shelf you pull off and say, let's run one of these. It's very different as you start to measure this value-based stuff.
Yeah.
I think there is some stuff.
Go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, first of all, I think, DI has done a tremendous job of, kind of proactively recognizing where these opportunities are and providing the lexicon and providing the tools. I mean, I look at something like EDI, right? There's so much work being done, but there was not really a way to easily collaborate and share information on that. Mm-hmm. So the EDI assessment tool that DI created, again, it's not designed, and I love the way you described it, Jack. It's not designed for people to say, hey, we're doing better than another destination. The whole point is it's designed to do two things. One is to allow benchmarking and the ability for us to continually collaborate, share ideas, best practices, but it's also the idea that there is no finish line, right? I mean, I think that's the key. Is traditional metrics tend to be very time bound. And I think to engage in this work, it requires a mind shift. And I think Jack's done a tremendous job of articulating this. There's not an end goal. This is a movement. So it's how are we evaluating whether we're meaningfully moving the needle on an ongoing basis. And one of the biggest ones
I think there are targets along the way, but you're right.
Yes,
there is no end goal.
There are milestones.
I think you guys have hit on a really important wrinkle here, which is this. These aren't the one of the biggest distinctions you just made in my head over this is these aren't goals that you go, because you think about KPIs, you think about showing them to other people. And that's the way we've done that in this industry. You're actually
Or
talking about
you're always
KPIs.
ranking yourself against someone else.
Yeah. But these are the KPIs that you hold up the mirror to yourself. And these are the ones that you
Exactly.
really, really dig in on. How are we doing? I mean, I had a thought when you were talking earlier about, organizations that are doing a great job according to their citizens and organizations that aren't. Imagine if you had a net promoter score for, is my tourism organization any good? And imagine, I mean, we all know that short of a 9 on a net promoter score, they're pretty much neutral or negative, right? So I think most of us, it would be really hard to get an NPS 9, but it's a really simple metric that speaks to the fact that we are talking about a kind of future where the tourism organization would have that kind of impact.
I
But
still,
but
yeah,
to get go ahead,
sorry.
Jack.
I still think there has to be some sort of KPI that you release to your citizens. And I think whether it's the old ones of occupancy and ADR, whether it's what's happening with these 17 standards and where you're on that, where are you on the EDI scale like that? Each one's going to be a little bit different, but what we need, I've always said, is to develop a measurement. And we've spent a year trying to crack it. We haven't cracked it yet, but we've a measurement that not only explains what it is you do, but how well do you do it, and is it benefiting the community? And that last one is just as important as anything else. And it's going to have to be some mix of something that measures community vitality, or measurements like quality of life or quality of place, of sustainability or stewardship. It's a collection of stuff that you kind of hone into a score, and it's has to be individualized because it's going to have to be focused to each destination and what's important to them, and stuff like that. But I think there has to be a community index of some sort. But I think we're in the area now where we're actually seeing what it is that should be measured and reported out.
This is why I love talking to you guys about this stuff, because you just gave me like 6 different things that I want to talk about. So in no particular order. The first thing is, we got the idea of an NPS. We always think of net promoter score from a consumer perspective. You look at consumer sentiment and what's the net promoter score for our destination. It's really a community net promoter score.
Right.
So we're actually, this year we launched our first ever resident sentiment survey, and my goal is to get to a net promoter score, because I think what you need to know is, how do Angelenos view what we do? And that is something you can use. And again, when I say I agree with you, Jack, there have to be milestones along the way. But you could get to a 9 or a 10, but that's still going to be transitory, because there are going to be new issues that are going to come at us. There are going to be new challenges. So it's the idea of not just getting there, but staying there. And what I would say is, I love the way you described it, Jack. You need the milestones, because what you need to know is that you're making relevant, significant goals every single year. And I'll go back to EDI. So, the work will never be done, right? When we're addressing issues of systemic institutionalized racism in the United States, that's going to outlive all 3 of us. But we need to make sure that the enormity of the challenge doesn't mean that we're not leaning in on every single year. So, for LA tourism, we have kind of 10 focus areas. Well, you can't boil the ocean. So last year we had 3 specific goals around EDI. And I think this goes to what you're talking about, Jack, in terms of milestones. So one of them is something as simple as board demographics. Are our boards of directors a true reflection of our community? So our goal was to increase representation among women in diverse communities by 30% in 2022. I think you have to get down to that level of specificity, because they have to be significant, relevant, and measurable goals.
And that type of thing is what actually chips away at the problem and starts some momentum, and then the bigger things happen after that. So that is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, that's so important.
So I will echo Adam Burke's sentiment. I love talking with you guys. You get my brain going. Just a little observation when you were talking, I was thinking about the research pieces we've been doing in communities lately, and the resident sentiment is always I. It's the wrong nomenclature. It has to be my community is my community isn't but if it's I, there is no community. And there's it's subtle, but the wording makes such a huge difference there. What is, if I'm in LA, my community is what? It's painful and it's whatever, and if you say I, then it's very easy to divorce community and and tourism from yourself. It's very interesting. All right, we're running long on time. We could talk forever.
That's true.
I'm going to give you the final thoughts. Thank you for sharing with us this journey as we move to become more relevant, more holistic, more contributory, and resilient and regenerative. It's been years to put these pillars in place, and now we're seeing that they're actually supporting a movement and stuff. I'm really encouraged by that. So last thoughts on this. It's 2023. It's like we're in a new stadium and a new race, and there's a whole new track to be figured out, but I'm excited. Over to you. I'll throw it to you first, Adam, and then you, Jack.
So I guess 3 thoughts. The first one is, we can't be daunted by the enormity of the challenge ahead of us, because, and granted, Pollyanna is my middle name. But that said, on the one hand, you hear a lot of people who basically say, the time to have meaningful action is past. We needed to act earlier than we did around issues like climate change. But by the same token, you have to look at it through the lens of that's what we know today.
Mm-hmm.
They also say that the sum total of human knowledge doubles every 5 years now. And, you look at something like cold fusion, that was theoretical until about 90 days ago. So what I'm incredibly encouraged by is the glide path to this. There can be complete game changers. I mean, when you look at something like the CEO of Patagonia, people who are with one move can say, I'm going to put that in a trust to make sure that for the rest of Patagonia's existence, it's going to support climate action. People can make a profound difference. So I guess the thing that leads me to is 2 quotes. One is, and you've heard me say this before, David, it's the Margaret Mead quote about, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Small things add up to movements. Small things change the world. So I think if we collaboratively lean on this, and I guess the last thing I'd say is, I don't think we should for a minute underestimate how powerful what our industry represents and what it does. Because I think we'd all acknowledge we are living in probably the most polarized society we have seen in our lifetimes. And yet, when you look at the Mark Twain quote about, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, I don't think that's a cliche or a catchphrase. You can't solve this stuff without being in dialogue. And what we do is incredibly powerful, because what's more powerful than bringing people together across political divides, across different socioeconomic strata, across different cultures and traditions? So I would argue the role that tourism plays in our global society is massively related to social license.
Yeah, I'd echo everything you said, Adam. After 9/11, after the Great Recession, after this epidemic and everything that went with it, we've always come back bigger. We've never been as big as we are now. We are the General Motors. We are the whatever the biggest corporation. We are the Facebook, whatever. We have more impact in terms of long-term change than any of those folks, and we need to realize that. And we need to embrace it and use it and get other people to come along with us on that. And then the other side of the coin is, even though we're really big, never underestimate those small changes that you can make. Because literally the one thing we've learned in this past year, looking on the issues of crime and safety and how a destination organization can be involved in that area, is that it doesn't have to solve the problem if it can just chip away at a couple little things here that it actually has control or has impact on. Then it creates this movement forward, and motion just feeds motion, and then big things will finally happen. So my advice to destination organizations is, don't be, like you said, don't be awed by the bigness of it, and don't be afraid to do something small.
That's fantastic, guys. I will sum up what you were saying, Adam. The way it feels to me is, tourism done well authentically shares people and places, and it shares them with the people coming in, it shares them around the world, and that's the opposite of war. So I'm so encouraged by what we see here. We need more tourism done well. It's been a pleasure to host you both. Thank you very much.